The chandeliers scattered light across the five-star hotel ballroom like frozen stars, casting shadows that danced over champagne flutes and polished silverware. Dr. Isabella Carter sat alone at table 17, her borrowed lavender dress feeling like a costume she had no right to wear. At 28, she was used to the harsh fluorescent lights of hospital corridors, not the warm golden glow of wealth that seemed to illuminate everyone except her. The string quartet played something tender and romantic while couples swayed across the dance floor. Isabella's fingers tightened around her water glass, the cool condensation grounding her in the present moment. She had told herself she wouldn't come. She had rehearsed a dozen excuses, drafted the regret message 3 times before deleting it. But Sarah, their mutual friend, had begged her to attend, and Isabella's inability to say no had landed her here, watching her ex-boyfriend marry into a fortune. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. James lifted his bride's hand to his lips, the gesture drawing appreciative sighs from the crowd. Isabella's chest constricted. He had kissed her hand exactly that way once, in the on-call room during a rare, quiet moment between emergencies. He had whispered promises about building a life together, about love surviving the brutal demands of medical training. She had believed him. She came alone to her ex's wedding. How pathetic. The words drifted from the adjacent table, sharp enough to draw blood. Isabella's cheeks burned. She raised her water glass with deliberate calm, taking a sip while pretending the comment had missed its mark entirely. But each syllable carved deeper into her already wounded pride. The music shifted to a waltz, and couples flooded the dance floor in a swirl of expensive fabric and practiced grace. Isabella's hands folded in her lap, nails pressing crescents into her palms. She should leave, slip out quietly, retreat to her cramped apartment and the pile of medical journals waiting on her desk. But her legs felt anchored by pride and the certain knowledge that leaving too soon would look like surrender. Then she made the mistake of glancing toward the newlyweds. James's eyes met hers across the crowded room. For one suspended moment, their gazes locked. His smile faltered, just barely, before he turned back to his bride. That tiny hesitation cut deeper than any whispered mockery. Isabella's stomach twisted. She needed to stand, to walk out with whatever dignity she could salvage. But before she could move, a shadow fell across her table. Without asking permission, a man drew out the empty chair beside her and sat down with the kind of decisiveness that suggested the seat had always belonged to him. Isabella looked up, startled. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, the sort of presence that commanded attention even in a room full of power and wealth. His black suit was perfectly tailored, catching the light with subtle elegance. A silver tie gleamed at his collar. But it was his eyes that unsettled her most, storm gray and assessing, fixed on her with unnerving intensity. She opened her mouth to protest, but he leaned closer, just enough for his words to reach her alone. "Pretend you're with me." Her heart stuttered. She turned toward him, confusion and indignation warring in her expression. "Excuse me. Don't look at me." His gaze remained trained across the room where a cluster of guests watched them openly, whispering behind raised hands. "They're gossiping. If you don't mind, let's act as though we came together. It spares you their stares and spares me their matchmaking." Isabella blinked, caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. He was a stranger, an intruder in her already fragile evening. Yet his voice carried a calm authority that made her pulse jump in ways she didn't want to examine. She wanted to refuse, to tell him she wasn't the kind of woman who played games with strangers. But when she glanced sideways, she noticed the change rippling through the room. The women who had eyed her with derision moments ago now looked with curiosity. The atmosphere had shifted. She was no longer pitiable. She was attached. Her lips parted in a small, incredulous laugh. "So you think I'll simply play girlfriend to a man I don't know?" Finally, he turned his head toward her. The gray eyes were cold, but beneath the surface, something gleamed like steel catching light. His cologne carried subtle notes of sandalwood, clean and refined. "Trust me," he murmured. "We both win." Isabella hesitated, common sense urging her to stand and reclaim control of her evening. But her pride, battered from whispers and pitying glances, whispered otherwise. Already the sting of mockery had dulled. Already she felt a strange shield of protection radiating from this enigmatic stranger. Her lips curved in a half-smile tinged with defiance. "And how far do you plan to take this little performance?" One brow rose, the corner of his mouth tilting. "Leave that to me." He shifted casually, resting his arm along the back of her chair. The gesture was so naturally intimate that several heads turned. Isabella sat straighter, alarm bells ringing in her mind. This man was far too skilled at playing pretend. "What's your name?" she asked quietly, suspicion woven into her voice. "Alexander Knight." His answer was clipped, as though explanations were unnecessary. Isabella froze. The name was familiar even to a resident with little time for headlines. Knight, the billionaire founder of Knight Biotech, the youngest CEO in medical technology. Praised for innovations, yet whispered about for ruthless ambition. She had seen his face once in a magazine, but never expected him to sit beside her, let alone speak to her as if they were allies. Before she could gather her wits, he reached for the wine bottle chilling beside them and poured gracefully into her glass. To any observer, he was every inch the attentive partner. "Relax, Dr. Carter," he said softly, pronouncing her name with surprising ease. "I have a good memory for remarkable faces. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Her pulse leapt. He knew her name. How? Their eyes locked, and Isabella had to look away, cheeks burning. This was absurd, dangerous, reckless. But as the music swelled and guests turned their attention toward the dance floor, she realized something undeniable. The night had just shifted course. What had begun as humiliation at her former lover's wedding had transformed into something entirely different. The stranger beside her was no ordinary man. And the moment he whispered, "Pretend you're with me," a story neither of them expected had already begun. Isabella told herself the performance was over. That when she walked out of that ballroom with Alexander Knight's arm brushing hers, she would never see him again. She returned to her modest apartment in the early hours, pulled off the lavender dress, and tried to immerse herself in medical charts and case studies. Yet the memory of his voice lingered, the calm authority in his whisper, the storm-colored eyes that seemed to look right through her protective walls. She reminded herself that he was dangerous territory, a billionaire with motives she couldn't understand, while she was a resident struggling through 80-hour weeks. Their paths should never have crossed. But life, as Isabella had learned through years of emergency medicine, rarely followed logical patterns. 3 days later, as she stepped out of the hospital after a grueling double shift, the familiar glint of a sleek black car caught her eye. The rear window rolled down, and Alexander Knight himself sat inside, immaculate as ever, though faint shadows under his eyes suggested he was as sleepless as she was. Isabella froze, her pulse quickening despite her exhaustion. "Don't tell me you're here to buy a stethoscope," she muttered. His lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "Get in, Dr. Carter. I only need 5 minutes of your time." Her first instinct was to refuse. She was exhausted, her scrubs wrinkled, her hair pulled into a messy knot. This wasn't the glamorous woman who had played his companion at the wedding. She was simply herself, weary and raw. But curiosity tugged at her, along with something deeper she didn't want to name. With a sigh, she opened the door and slid inside. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cedar, a cocoon far removed from the sterile scent of antiseptic she had lived in all day. Alex wasted no time. "Do you remember what I said at the wedding?" Isabella rolled her eyes. "Hard to forget. I nearly choked on dessert from all that fake smiling." The corner of his mouth twitched, amusement flickering briefly. "Here's the thing. The press and my board are relentless. They want to see me with someone. They want stability, a family image. My company is thriving, but in their eyes, I'm incomplete." Isabella frowned. "And you think dragging me into your spotlight will fix that?" He met her gaze directly, voice steady. "I need someone who can hold her own. Someone who won't crumble under scrutiny. At the wedding, you played the role effortlessly." Isabella laughed, sharp and incredulous. "Effortlessly? My palms were sweating the entire time." He didn't flinch. "You still convinced everyone. That's what matters." Isabella shook her head, exhaustion making her blunt. "I'm a doctor, not your prop. My life is too full of chaos already." Alex leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. "I can make it worth your while. Funding for your hospital wing. Resources for research. You told me you treat patients who can't afford care. Imagine what you could do with a grant from Knight Biotech. The words hit her like a physical blow. She thought of the oncology ward where children fought battles too unfair for their small bodies, where parents wept because insurance refused another round of treatment. She thought of the free clinic that struggled to stay open with outdated equipment. She thought of faces etched with hope and fear. Her chest tightened. He was manipulating her, offering what she longed for most, the chance to heal more lives. But was it manipulation if the outcome saved people? She pressed her fingers to her temple. Why me? She whispered. You could hire an actress, someone trained to play the part. Alex shook his head. Actresses want the cameras. I want authenticity. You're grounded, focused. You have no interest in fame. That's why you'll work. Isabella exhaled shakily. The car hummed through city streets, neon lights streaking across the windows. She wanted to say no, to walk away from this mess before it swallowed her. But the memory of those whispered taunts at the wedding resurfaced. The image of James's smug smile burned behind her eyes. And now the offer dangled before her, tied not to pride, but to the lives of patients she couldn't forget. At last, she looked at Alex, her voice quiet but firm. If I agree, there are conditions. His brow arched. Name them. First, I'm not a puppet. I choose when to walk away. If you become unbearable, I'm gone. Second, there will be no lies beyond the performance. No false promises, no pretending beyond what's necessary. Alex regarded her for a long moment before nodding slowly. Fair. Then he extended his hand. Temporary agreement. Isabella hesitated, then slipped her hand into his. His grip was firm, warm, steady. For an instant, the world outside the car vanished, and she felt the peculiar certainty that she was stepping into something far larger than herself. Just pretend, Isabella, he murmured, using her first name with deliberate intimacy. Her breath caught. Pretend, she echoed. But inside, a voice whispered that once she crossed this line, nothing would ever be pretend again. The first test of their arrangement came sooner than Isabella expected. Barely a week after the handshake that sealed their deal, she found herself standing outside the grand entrance of a downtown hotel, the venue glittering with light and opulence. Tonight wasn't a wedding but a charity gala hosted by Knight Biotech to raise funds for drug development. Isabella adjusted the hem of the rented evening gown that clung to her nervously. The fabric shimmered under the golden lights, though she felt like a fraud wrapped in borrowed silk. Her feet wobbled slightly in unfamiliar heels. She took a breath, but the air caught in her throat as she nearly stumbled on the last marble step. Before gravity betrayed her completely, a hand gripped her firmly at the waist. Steady, Alex's voice murmured, calm and unyielding. Isabella glanced up, her pulse skipping at the sight of him. He looked like he had walked straight out of a glossy magazine, his black suit tailored flawlessly, his silver tie glinting under the lights, his expression composed yet watchful. For a moment, she forgot to breathe. You really enjoy saving damsels in distress, don't you? She muttered, cheeks heating. His lips curved faintly, only when they insist on wearing treacherous shoes. He offered his arm, and she hesitated before sliding her hand into the crook, aware of the stares already gathering. As they entered the ballroom, heads turned instantly. Conversations faltered. Champagne flutes paused midair, and whispers rippled across the crowd. Night finally brought someone. Who is she? Isabella's stomach nodded, but Alex walked as though impervious, his steps steady, his presence commanding. He introduced her with calm certainty, never embellishing, never faltering, simply letting her stand at his side. And the effect was electric. Women eyed her with thinly veiled envy. Men studied her with new curiosity. Even the board members, who had once pressed Alex about his solitary life, now looked with tentative approval. Isabella forced herself to breathe. This was pretend, nothing more. When the music swelled, Alex turned to her. Dance with me. Isabella's eyes widened. I'll trip and humiliate both of us. His voice softened, pitched low for her ears alone. Just follow. Like surgery, steady hands. His words drew a reluctant laugh from her, nerves loosening just enough. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to guide her to the dance floor. The moment his hand settled at her waist, warmth seeped through the layers of fabric. He moved with precision, leading with subtle cues that carried her effortlessly through the waltz. At first, she stumbled, her steps clumsy, but his grip steadied her, his gaze anchoring her. Gradually, her body found rhythm with his. Their eyes met briefly, and something flickered there, unspoken and sharp. Around them, the ballroom blurred. It felt absurdly natural, as if they had danced together 100 times. Isabella's heart thudded too fast, betraying her. She reminded herself sternly that this was an arrangement, a charade. But every brush of his hand sent shivers through her resolve. When the song ended, applause echoed around them. Isabella pulled back, slightly breathless, cheeks flushed. "You're frighteningly good at this," she whispered. Alex leaned closer, his gray eyes unreadable. "Who said I'm pretending?" Her pulse faltered at the implication. But before she could respond, a woman in a glittering gown swept over, offering Alex an arch smile. "Alexander, it's been too long." "And who is this?" Alex's expression didn't shift. "This is Dr. Isabella Carter," his voice smooth as glass. "She's important to me." Isabella nearly choked on air but forced herself to smile politely as the woman's eyes flicked over her with thinly veiled calculation. When the woman finally drifted away, Isabella exhaled sharply. "Important to you? That's quite a line." He adjusted his cufflink casually. The line worked. "She won't bother you again." Isabella narrowed her eyes, but said nothing. Throughout the evening, Alex remained at her side, introducing her to influential figures, guiding conversations with subtle skill. Each time she faltered, he smoothed over the moment with a quiet remark or a steadying look. And slowly, against her will, Isabella realized she was no longer acting merely for survival. She was slipping into the role, letting the warmth of his attention pull her into dangerous comfort. Near the end of the night, as they stood at the edge of the ballroom with dessert plates in hand, Isabella leaned closer and muttered, "You really are an actor, Knight." He glanced at her, lips curving faintly. "Or perhaps I'm simply telling the truth." She swallowed hard, unable to reply. For a heartbeat too long, the world seemed to contract to the space between them, an unspoken charge in the air. Then a photographer passed by, raising his camera, and Alex slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close with practiced ease. "Smile," he whispered. The flash went off, capturing them in a tableau of elegance and intimacy. Isabella forced a smile, her heart stumbling, her mind spinning. This was supposed to be pretend, yet each moment with him blurred the lines further. By the time the gala ended, Isabella's cheeks ached from smiling, and her pulse thrummed with confusion. As they exited into the cool night, she withdrew her hand from his arm, needing space to breathe. "That was exhausting," she muttered. Alex opened the car door for her, his expression unreadable. "Exhausting perhaps, but effective. You played the part well." Isabella sank into the seat, staring out at the glittering city. She told herself she was still in control, still pretending. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that something had already shifted, and that terrified her more than anything. Over the following weeks, Isabella found herself swept into a world she had only glimpsed in passing. A world of grand concerts, art galleries, and hushed cafes tucked into corners of the city where Alexander Knight seemed to lower his guard by increments. At first, she kept mental notes, reminding herself this was temporary, a transaction dressed in silk. Yet slowly, her defenses wavered. One evening, he invited her to a symphony performance at the historic downtown theater. The ceiling stretched high, painted with celestial murals, the chandeliers glowing like captured stars. Isabella sat stiffly in the velvet seat, her borrowed gown brushing the carpet, while Alex sat beside her in a dark suit, eyes fixed on the stage. When the first notes of Beethoven rose through the air, she stole a glance at him. His profile was sharp, his expression distant, yet she noticed his hand resting still on his knee, fingers curled tightly as though holding something unseen. During the interlude, he spoke quietly, almost as if confessing. "My mother used to love this piece. She would play it on the piano in our house. Said it made her feel alive." Isabella blinked, surprised by the softness in his voice. What happened to her? His gaze didn't leave the stage. "She died when I was young. The doctors tried an experimental treatment. It failed. My father told me never to trust imperfection again." His words carried a weight heavier than the music itself. Isabella's throat tightened. For a moment, she forgot the man beside her was a billionaire who had barged into her life with arrogance. For a moment, he was just a son who had lost his mother, a boy molded by grief and an unforgiving father. She whispered, "Sometimes imperfection is what makes us human." He turned his head, gray eyes meeting hers, and for an instant, she felt as though the world shrank to that narrow space between them. Another night, he took her to a small cafe far from luxury, with wooden tables and the aroma of roasted beans. Isabella laughed at the sight of him cradling a plain cappuccino, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the humble surroundings. "Never thought I'd see you here," she teased. Alex's lips curved faintly. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain." The banter drew laughter from her, warm and unguarded, and in that laughter, she caught the glimmer of something dangerous, something real. But the bond deepened not only through his confessions. It also grew through her own. One late night at the hospital, Isabella sat beside a patient, a boy of 12 with leukemia, whose frail body trembled with fever. She stayed long past her shift, holding his hand until he drifted into restless sleep. When she finally stepped outside into the cold night air, she found Alex waiting by his car. "You look exhausted," he said softly. She shrugged, tears pricking her eyes. "I lost a patient last month. 17 years old. I keep thinking, maybe if I had stayed longer, pushed harder." Her voice cracked. Alex placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You can't save everyone. Even I had to learn that." His words were steady, but she sensed the echo of his own scars. She looked up at him, and in the stillness of the hospital parking lot, something shifted between them. It was no longer only a performance for the eyes of others. It was solace, unspoken and fragile. Over coffee at another modest diner, he asked about her ex. Isabella stirred her cup slowly, the motion grounding her as she spoke. James wanted the prestige, the connections. When his residency ended, he got an offer at a private practice. Then he met Vanessa. Her father owns half the medical supply companies on the East Coast. She laughed bitterly. "I couldn't compete with that." "He was a fool," Alex said simply. Isabella met his eyes, surprised by the conviction in his voice. "You don't know that. I know you stayed late with a dying child when you could have gone home. I know you negotiated terms with me not for yourself, but for patients who can't afford treatment. James chose money over integrity. That makes him a fool." Her chest tightened at his words. For years, she had carried the weight of not being enough, not wealthy enough, not connected enough. But Alex saw her differently. He saw her work, her dedication, her heart. The touches between them began to linger. His hand at the small of her back as they entered venues. Her fingers brushing his as they shared a program at the theater. The space between them grew smaller with each passing day, charged with unspoken feelings neither dared name. One evening, after an art gallery opening, they stood before a painting of a stormy sea. Isabella studied the canvas, the way the artist captured chaos and beauty in equal measure. "Do you ever feel like you're drowning?" she asked quietly. Alex didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Every day, but less so when you're near." She turned to him, breath catching. His eyes held hers, and in that moment, the pretense fell away entirely. This wasn't an arrangement anymore. This was something real, something terrifying, something neither of them could control. "Alex," she whispered, but the words died on her lips. He reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "I know," he murmured. "I feel it too." They stood there in the gallery, surrounded by strangers and art, yet utterly alone in their shared understanding. Isabella's heart raced. She wanted to tell him she was falling for him, that every moment with him made the charade harder to maintain. But fear held her back, fear of what loving him might cost. As they left the gallery that night, walking side by side through the city streets, Isabella realized with painful clarity that she was already lost. The man beside her had become more than a convenient arrangement. He had become necessary, and that terrified her more than anything. The shift from tenderness to turmoil came without warning, like a scalpel cutting through skin to reveal infection beneath. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, during what should have been a routine task, updating patient charts in the hospital's record system. Isabella sat in the small residence office, her laptop screen glowing in the dim light as she cross-referenced treatment protocols. Her fingers paused over the keyboard when she noticed a flagged file in the system's shared database. Clinical trial participants, Knight Biotech Partnership. The notation caught her attention because she recognized the company name, because it was Alex's company, because her world had become so entangled with his that even hospital databases triggered thoughts of him. She clicked the file, expecting routine documentation. What she found instead made her blood run cold. The trial involved a new oncology drug, participants recruited from lower-income brackets who couldn't afford standard treatments. The initial patient reports detailed severe complications, organ stress, unexpected seizures, dangerous blood pressure fluctuations. Yet the summary document, the one submitted to regulatory authorities, listed outcomes as successful with minimal adverse effects. Isabella's medical training kicked in immediately. She scrolled deeper, comparing individual patient records against the official summary. The discrepancies were impossible to miss. Fields had been overwritten. Language had been changed. Entire sections of complication reports had simply vanished from the final submission. Her hands trembled as she checked the digital signature at the bottom of the approval document. Alexander Knight, CEO, Knight Biotech. The words blurred as tears pricked her eyes. No, there had to be an explanation. Stolen credentials. A clerical error. Someone using his authority without permission. The man who had shared his mother's story at the symphony, who waited outside the hospital after her shifts, who made her feel seen. That man couldn't knowingly endanger lives for profit. But the evidence didn't lie, and Isabella had learned early in medical school that wishful thinking killed patients. She closed the file quickly, her pulse racing. The empty office suddenly felt suffocating. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. The weight of her oath pressed on one side. First, do no harm. Protect patients. Speak truth. The pull of her heart pressed on the other. Protect Alex. Believe in him. Give him the benefit of doubt. She was a doctor. She had sworn to prioritize patient welfare above all else. But she was also a woman who had fallen in love, against every rational instinct, with a man who now stood accused by irrefutable data. That evening, they attended a gallery opening. Some contemporary artist whose work Alex claimed to appreciate, but Isabella suspected he attended more for networking than aesthetics. She moved through the space like a ghost, her body present but her mind trapped in the clinical trial files. Every time Alex touched her back or leaned close to comment on a painting, she saw those patient reports. Every complication, every falsified entry. His signature. "Are you all right?" he asked during a quiet moment, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. Isabella forced a smile. Just tired. But her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. Between courses at the dinner that followed, she leaned closer and whispered a question she hoped might reveal his character. "Do you ever keep secrets that could hurt lives?" Alex stilled, his fork pausing midair. His eyes shifted toward her, storm gray and unreadable. "Always," he murmured, voice low. "It's survival in my world." The words pierced her like needles. Survival. Did survival mean erasing patience, silencing truth? Isabella felt her throat tighten. She wanted to demand answers, to throw the files into his face and watch his expression. But the room brimmed with power brokers, their eyes sharp and their ears ready to catch any scandal. Instead, she forced a brittle smile and clutched her wine glass until her knuckles whitened. Later that night, when the event ended and they rode in silence through the city, Alex studied her profile in the reflection of the tinted window. "You're distant," he said. Isabella turned away, unable to meet his gaze. "I'm tired." He didn't press, but the air between them grew heavy, strained with words unsaid. Back in her apartment, Isabella opened the files again. She read every line, every notation, every discrepancy. The faces of patients filled her mind. The 12-year-old boy fighting leukemia, the teenager she had lost, the families who clung to hope with desperate hands. Could she turn away from them to protect her heart? She whispered into the darkness, torn and trembling. "If I stay silent, I'm complicit. If I speak, I destroy him." Tears blurred her vision. She thought of Alex's hand steadying her on the marble steps, of his rare laughter in the humble cafe, of the way he had made her feel seen at her lowest moment. She thought of the promise in his eyes when he whispered, "Trust me." Her heart pulled one way, her oath pulled the other, and between the two, she felt herself unraveling. The following weekend, Alex invited her to a secluded estate outside the city, a place surrounded by pine trees and silence. He told her he needed to escape the endless scrutiny, to breathe away from flashing cameras. Isabella went. hoping perhaps the quiet would bring clarity. They walked through forest trails, their breaths visible in the crisp air. At one point, Alex stopped and asked softly, "Do you ever regret choosing medicine?" She shook her head. "Never, even when it breaks me." He studied her, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. "You're different, Isabella. Most people in my world want power or recognition. You want neither. You want to save lives." His words should have warmed her, but they only made the pain sharper. Because if he truly saw her, if he truly understood, then how could he sign away lives with the stroke of a pen? That night, as they sat by the fire in the estate's living room, the flames casting golden light across his face, Isabella couldn't hold back anymore. She whispered, "If you had to choose between protecting people and protecting yourself, which would you choose?" Alex's jaw tightened. In this world, if you don't protect yourself, you can't protect anyone. His answer twisted inside her like a blade. She stared into the fire, her heart aching. She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the fragile intimacy they had built. But the files loomed in her mind, undeniable and damning. When he reached for her hand, she let him take it. But her thoughts were a storm. Her heart whispered love. Her duty screamed truth. And between the two, she felt herself drowning, pulled under by currents too strong to fight. The man she loved might be the man endangering the patients she had sworn to protect. And she didn't know which truth would destroy her more, discovering he was guilty, or discovering he was innocent after she had already betrayed him. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.